We're going to continue now with the business portion of our meeting. The next item on the agenda is the approval of annual approval of renewals and designations. What I'd like to do is take a motion for items 1 through 25. Before I do so, are there any items in that list that need to be separated out?
1 to 25.
Then I'd like a motion for approval of items 1 through 25 under the heading Annual Approvals, Renewals, and Designations.
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Shaw, Mrs. Howard, is there any discussion? Can we take a roll call?
Yes. Mrs. Chu?
Yes.
Mrs. Howard?
Yes.
Mrs. Lax?
Yes.
Mr. McAvoy?
Yes.
Mr. Philipchak?
Yes.
Mrs. Shaw?
Yes.
President Cohen?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is a fiscal year 2016 budget overview and discussion. Mr. Giuliano?
Yes, sir. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, the Board of Education will be approving the final 2015-2016 budget. At this time, I'd like to take a few moments to go through high level what the budget looks like and the kinds of items that are included in this budget. First, we'll begin with an overview of the budget. As we've been discussing over the last several months, various components to the budget have led us to a point where we have specifics on our revenue side. The revenues remain consistent in all areas except one in comparison to the tentative budget that was adopted back in April. And the one area that has changed is the community programs transfer. That amount has increased by $100,000 as we've assessed the amount of revenue that has been produced through that enterprise, and will be able to help sustain the budget. As a result, that is helping to offset some additional expenses that were not originally anticipated, one of which happens to be the addition of 2 elementary teachers, which we had previously discussed as being necessary due to class sizes moving into next year. So our total budget for next year is $143,323,923. Our revenue and estimated expenses must be equal, and thus our budget is in balance. In terms of the makeup and the impact on taxes, the general fund tax increase remains as it was in the previous meetings that we've discussed at $3,014,000. The debt service fund tax increase also remains as it had been reported at $708,000 for a total net tax increase of $3.7 million. One of the items that we had discussed during previous meetings has to do specifically with the debt service tax levy and how that's specifically related to how the mortgage payment, which is what's funded through debt service, has an ebb and flow to it. And I promised that I would provide some additional information on that. And so on this next slide, you'll see information that basically a chart that illustrates what debt service looks like from last year moving into next year. You see in the first 2 bars there is an increase in the amount necessary to pay debt. That is a result of how the payments are structured. After the 2016 year, we will see a slight decline in that payment, and then you can see following that there is a relatively steady decline as debt is paid. In terms of budget highlights, overall, the budget is supporting instructional programs through regular education, special education. We have curricular improvements within the budget. There's a continued investment in technology and a provision for capital improvements. So let's talk specifically about the staffing. This budget, and this is the final cut, reflects additional preschool teacher in general education and a preschool instructional aide to support that program. There are 2 additional elementary teachers included in this budget for grades 1 through 5. The specific placement of those teachers will be identified as we move forward into the scheduling process. We have a science teacher, 2 science teachers actually, at Churchill Junior High School, 1 each for 8th and 9th grade. A health teacher at Churchill Junior High School, and the introduction of a new LLD, that's Learning Language Disability Program in Special Education at Hammersholt. There will be 1 teacher and 1 instructional assistant necessary for that program. Moving ahead, at the elementary level, the introduction of a behavioral disabilities program is required at the elementary level, which will be staffed by 1 teacher and 1 instructional assistant. Multiply disabled program at the high school to accommodate students that are moving up from Churchill requires a teacher to sustain that program. And we have a resource room teacher at Hammersholt to support student needs at the middle school. In addition, at Churchill, for the autism program students that are moving up from Hammersholt to the junior high school, we have an additional class for autism supported by 1 teacher and 1 instructional assistant. Well, as I've gone through these slides, each of the additional positions that we've added since the tentative adoption, those have been identified by asterisk. We'll be adding a lunch aide at Irwin. This is all in the support area, human resources coordinator, curriculum and instruction, golf head coach, and a gymnastics assistant coach. In addition, the budget reflects a substitute clerical rate increase and the elimination of elementary instructional assistants where those had been unanticipated and added in the current year to help offset the class size growth that we had seen at the elementary level. In support of instruction, some overviews in terms of what the budget includes. And so in arts education, there are improvements to the MIDI labs. For musical instruments, we have funds allocated for the acquisition of a vibraphone, bassoon, oboes, F-horns, and a tuba. We have funds allocated for choral riser replacement at the high school. In language arts, we have leveled literacy intervention materials for grades 6 to 9, the foundations implementation in grades K to 12, and the readers and writers workshop books for grades K to 7. In world languages, classroom libraries will be improved and expanded for grades 6 to 12. We have funds allocated for AP French, language and cultural textbooks, as well as AP German textbooks. In science, we'll be replacing the STAR labs at the elementary schools with 2 new STAR labs. This has been a long requested item, and we're finally in a position to be able to address this need. Honors biology textbooks, astronomy textbooks, and Pasco data acquisition equipment for grades 9 through 12. In the technical, business, and computer education area, we will be replacing video production cameras, photography cameras, STEM equipment to support the engineering program, DEPCO interactive modular learning upgrades at the middle school, and we will be replacing the family and consumer science laboratory ranges at the high school. And in mathematics, we have the replacement of statistics textbooks for new series. That's it in terms of a quick overview on the 2015-2016 budget. So just a heads up, coming up next, we have 2016-2017 budget development review and discussion. I know we're just ending one process, but I want to give you a quick overview of what we'll be going into for the next subsequent year's process, beginning in the summer of 2015 with the administrators district-wide working on the development for the next year's budget, the next year's budget, then in October 2015 with central office review, and then Finance Committee beginning in December of 2015, followed by the board's review and discussion in January of 2016. And that concludes the overview on the budget.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the 2015-16 budget? I do want to underscore to the public and repeat what Mr. McAvoy said last time, that our review and putting together of a budget is something that is ongoing, goes on the entire year. We're already going to be starting on next year's budget in no time, as Mr. Giuliani mentioned. So this vote isn't any, without discussion, does not mean that the board hasn't put full consideration into next year's budget. We've been doing that all year long. Okay. We're going to
Dr. Cohn?
Yes.
I just want to send some kudos out to Dr. Valesky. This is Dr. Valesky's first East Brunswick budget, and the amount of work that goes into this by Dr. Valesky, as well as all the administrators, and as Mr. Giuliani said, as soon as one ends, they begin working. We all begin working, but the central office begins working on the next budget. And I think this particular budget is, Mr. Giuliani said, I'm going to give you a quick overview. It is so comprehensive, line by line. And I just want the public to know the amount of work, hard work, that goes into putting together a fiscally sound budget so that our children, our students are the best. Thank you, Dr. Cohn.
Thank you.
Dr. Cohn?
Mrs. Shaw.
I do have one question. On the slide that had the budget summary, and it talks about the tax levy summary, we note at the bottom that there is a net increase of 3.99% over fiscal year 2015 general fund and debt service levies. I wondered if Mr. Giuliani would explain for the public how that works, considering we have a 2% cap on the tax levy.
Certainly.
Thank you.
So it took me a moment because I wanted to pull my reference worksheet out with regard to the tax computations. When we're looking at the overall tax increase, we have two components, as were noted on the slide. The general fund component, which supports the annual budget, which is for the day-to-day operations of the district. The second component is debt service, which is to pay the mortgages on improvements to our facilities. The debt service piece, I showed a graph, a chart, that reflected what the ups and downs are and how that functions, and that is really something that's set at the time that bonds are sold, and those bonds were authorized by the community. The other component in the general fund budget is what the board approves annually for operations. When we break down those components, we're looking at an overall increase of 2.5% increase on the general fund component, and strictly looking at the taxes on the general fund. And when we look at the tax increase on the debt service, what its original starting point was, and then moving into next year, that component is 9.2%. And actually, let me note a correction, because I'm glad you brought this up, because as I'm looking at my worksheet here, the slide was not correct in indicating what that net increase is. It's actually 2.99%. So my apologies for that, and I'm glad you brought that up. I hadn't picked that up previously.
That's kind of important.
Yeah, well, it's a 2.99%. We'll correct the slide for the website, but it is an overall 2.99% increase.
Okay. Thank you. I just,
No,
you had already explained that to me at one
I'm glad you
point,
brought that up,
but I
because
think
it
it's
caused me to
important.
look at the other details, so thank you.
Okay, great. I just think it's important for folks in town to understand that.
Thank you. Dr. Gillespie?
Mr. McAvoy, thank you very much for your comments, but I just wanted to make a comment for the public that I know the board already knows. We are blessed with a very strong financial department, talented people that watch over the public's money throughout the year. And I, for one, am able to leave the office knowing that I will never get a phone call about any financial distress in the school district. So, Mr. Giuliano, I appreciate your work and your staff's work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments then?